This is just the start, and I think that a lot of businesses probably didn't take Trump at his word when he said this is what he was going to do.
Well, we're seeing a full-blown trade war, aren't we, starting between the US and its trading partners. The markets are in turmoil, with the dollar at its 3-month low after Donald Trump enacted today sweeping tariffs on Canada, Mexico and China. Canada has already announced it will retaliate, and impulsive economic policies on behalf of Washington, D.C. are fueling fears that these actions could push America's economy into a contraction or even a full-blown Trump session. Speaking in the aftermath of the US decision to impose tariffs on Canada, the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, didn't mince his words around addressing American people directly.
We don't want this. We want to work with you as a friend and ally. And we don't want to see you hurt either. But your government has chosen to do this to you. As of this morning, markets are down, and inflation is set to rise dramatically all across your country. Your government has chosen to put American jobs at risk, at the thousands of workplaces that succeed because of materials from Canada or because of consumers in Canada, or both.
That's Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister. Allie Renison joins us now. She's an Associate Director with SEC Newsgate consultancy firm and a former policy advisor to the Business and Trade Secretary of State, Kemi Badenoch. Allie, a warm welcome back to the show. Are we looking at a full-scale trade war here? It certainly feels like it's prickling into one. What do you assess?
Well, the retaliation is in full flow right now. I have to say that even though Trump said during the election campaign that this is what he wanted to do, it's unlike anything I've ever seen. The stock markets have been tanking 2 days in a row in the US. And actually, Trump and his sort of cabinet have come out to say that they're going to retaliate in response to Canada's retaliation, even though the WTO does provide for the authorization of retaliatory tariffs. This is just the start. And I think that a lot of businesses probably didn't take Trump at his word when he said this is what he was going to do.
So Donald Trump has said he's going to retaliate against Canada's retaliation, because Canada's said that they'll be implementing 25% tariffs back, I suppose, against $155 billion worth of American goods, starting with tariffs on $30 billion worth of goods immediately, and then the rest to come in the next 21 days. So Donald Trump's then said he's going to tariff against that, or he's going to retaliate to that?
Well, he's basically said that in the reciprocal tariffs that he announced basically about a couple of weeks ago, they're supposed to come in on the 2nd of April, which is where he wants to make sure that basically if he thinks there's unfair trade barriers that other countries are putting up against the US, that he wants the value of the response to be equitable in effect. And he's basically saying that he will factor in things like Canada's sales tax into what that considers to be kind of an unfair trade barrier. So it's getting really hot really quickly. And I think the interesting thing looking at from Canada's perspective is they aren't just looking at tariffs in terms of retaliation. They're talking about already implementing, as of today, a 25% an electricity tax on energy that's sent to major states in the US from Canada. So the scope of this could get wide really quickly.
How much does the US rely on Canada then for energy?
Well, it's interesting. They send a lot of oil and electricity. Very often the oil is processed in the US. I mean, it's a two-way flow, but it's still quite a considerable issue for them to worry about. And interesting, if you look at sort of some of the things that Canada has said on tariffs it's going to retaliate against, it's looking firstly at agriculture, because basically the US, its first largest import partner in terms of what it gets from the rest of the world on food is from Canada. The only thing I would add to that is that Canada has not implemented all of its threatened tariffs. It said that within 21 days, it's going to implement the rest if they're still standing. So maybe there's some room for negotiation. But the way that Justin Trudeau was talking just now, it doesn't
he
sound
called them dumb, didn't he? I mean, that is strong. That is very different to what we've heard from President Zelensky today, who's sort of had to kind of go back to Donald Trump with his tail between his legs and make some more positive noises about Donald Trump and the US and their involvement in Ukraine. Justin Trudeau's gone out on the attack.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, it's a little bit easier for Justin Trudeau to do that because he's not going to be the Prime Minister of Canada in a couple of days. There's going to be a new leader from the same party. So he's certainly having quite a rousting sort of closing act finale in his political career, leaving it for the next Prime Minister of Canada to deal with. But looking at what all the other candidates are saying, including from the Conservatives in Canada, they're being just as strong. So it'll be interesting to see if this actually gets resolved anytime soon and the rhetoric tempers down.
And have businesses stood by their pledge to remove US alcohol off the shelves as well? They're basically talking about limiting US products available on the shelves in Canada so that they won't be, so that goods going the other way won't be subject to trade tariffs. Have we seen that?
We have, and actually, having gone to university in Canada, the interesting thing about the way that they do liquor sales is it's not actually businesses that make those decisions. It's basically the liquor board that's controlled by the provincial government. And the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, has said that he's already started making those decisions. So we're already seeing those moves. And it seems to be that Canadians are backing the Canadian government on some of this, even though it will hurt them as well.
What about Mexico? Have we heard as strong words from the Mexican president?
No, they've been, interestingly, much more silent in terms of their planned retaliation. They've said today that they're going to. They haven't announced the scope of the sort of responses for those products. It's interesting that actually, that despite the fact that Mexico, in terms of actually being a potential border and security threat, whether it's from, migration or from fentanyl coming over the border and other drugs, Mexico is a much bigger issue, but they've been a lot more temperate in their engagement with the White House. And I think that reflects the fact that Canada doesn't understand why it's in this position still.
Mexico supplies the US with a lot of avocados, doesn't it?
Yes.
This will affect the US consumer. Donald Trump was elected to office because the cost of living was so high. The economy was already starting to improve. We've seen that restrict a little bit in the last few weeks. But the main gripe, the main reason why a lot of Americans went with Donald Trump is they wanted to feel better off again. These trade tariffs, these sanctions, could deliberately interrupt that, couldn't they?
They could certainly put prices up. I mean, sometimes I think businesses will use sort of tariffs if they're low level to kind of as an excuse at times to sort of put their prices up. But the scale that we're seeing now, they have to pass those on to consumers. Avocados, it's interesting. I think a lot of the people that tend to eat avocados in America, are probably fairly well-to-do to begin with. So I think some of those people are willing to pay some of those prices. But in terms of the wider impact on global trade, putting prices up, the UK is not insulated from that, even if it manages to avoid some of these tariffs, is going to be quite considerable. The stock market is tanking. We'll see if it rebounds in the next couple of days or not. And I think what businesses and investors are now suddenly waking up to is we don't know what's next. The unpredictability of that is really spooking the markets. And I think when the economics figures start coming out, that's what's going to really spook the markets even further.
So let's just expand a little bit, Allie, if we can, on although there's no official US tariffs that have been announced for the UK. In fact, there was a pretty successful meeting between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump last week where they announced a trade deal. Don't have much detail on that at all. But of course, if there is a substantial trade deal, then that avoids the need for tariffs. But we here in the UK will still be affected by what Donald Trump is doing with other countries in terms of trade tariffs. Just break that down. How much will we be affected and what might that look like for us?
Well, the UK is a very hyper sort of trade exposed economy. We have very globally integrated supply chains that we're part of. And so, when one part of the world sneezes, it's very easy for us to catch a cold in terms of prices rising from trade. And the other thing that I would say is that in terms of targeted tariffs on the UK, no, we're not in the frame. But next week, there's supposed to be a set of sweeping across the board for every country steel and aluminium tariffs coming from the US. We don't know if we're going to be exempted from that. We won't obviously have an economic deal in time for that. So obviously UK officials are over trying to make the case for why actually what we send to the US in terms of steel isn't really a threat to the US industry. It's pretty specialized kind of stuff.
Yeah, I guess it depends if interest rates rise globally, then that will affect us, our economic growth here in the UK. Allie, it's always great to speak to you. Oh, a quick one from James. Canada has no way of transporting its oil by pipeline from West Canada to East Canada without going through the USA. They can't start a power war with the USA. Can we expand any more on that? I have not fact-checked it, I have to say.
Well, this is actually one of the reasons why Trump would like to sort of the Keystone Pipeline sort of process that Justin Trudeau has actually sort of shut down during his premiership. Trump wants to kind of revive that. But there is actually electricity goes down to U.S. states. It doesn't need a pipeline for that necessarily either.
And Marcus is in touch saying the tariffs are completely illegal under international law. Why are we not talking about that? Are they illegal under international law, Allie?
You'd have to make a claim and set sort of a dispute at the WTO. No idea if the US under Trump is going to abide by that, quite frankly. And those take time. The EU, certainly, if it gets hit by US tariffs, it'd like the UK to sort of join suit, particularly because Trump also has VAT in his sights. Both the EU and the UK have VAT, and the US thinks that this is sort of, under Trump, an unjust trade barrier. It'd be interesting to see if we get a deal to avoid that, and the EU that also has VAT doesn't.
Look, really interesting stuff. Thank you so much for being with us. Allie Renison there, Associate Director with SEC Newsgate consultancy firm, former policy advisor to the Business and Trade Secretary.